In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The member for Rankin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Treasurer. Why has the Treasurer been congratulating himself on the economy when there are still 2.4 million unemployed or underemployed Australians and the jobless queues are growing?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Rankin for that Dorothy Dixer, Mr Speaker, because 178,000 jobs were created last month, Mr Speaker. 178,000 jobs, Mr Speaker, including jobs in the construction industry due to home builder, which the member for Rankin and Labor Party didn't support, Mr Speaker. The reality is, of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero at the start of this crisis, 80% of them are now back at work, Mr Speaker. 80% of them are now back at work, Mr Speaker. Now, when it comes to JobKeeper, it's been an economic lifeline for the people of Australia. It has been a remarkable program, Mr Speaker.
Member for
and
Rankin.
they're not my words, they're the words of the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia, Mr Speaker. Now, 3.6 million Australians were benefiting from JobKeeper in the month of September. Now, Mr Speaker, from the ATO data, for the month of October, there are 1.5 million Australians who are on JobKeeper. Over 2 million fewer Australians on JobKeeper in October compared to September because the economic momentum, the economic recovery is underway, Mr Speaker. Because there is a comeback, Mr Speaker. There is a comeback in the Australian economy, and it's showing remarkable resilience. Our AAA credit rating has been reaffirmed, Mr Speaker. The Governor of the Reserve Bank has said that the Morrison government is on the right track when it comes to fiscal policy, Mr Speaker. And we continue to undertake and to announce significant new initiatives like the one today to support travel agents around the country, Mr Speaker, and like on Sunday with the extension for another 3 months of home builder. And in the budget there were more measures, Mr Speaker. Immediate expensing for businesses with a turnover up to $5 billion so that they can invest, Mr Speaker. And of course there was also the lost carryback measure. There was support for apprentices right across the country. And I can inform the member for Rankin that today consumer confidence was up by 2.9%, Mr Speaker. And it's up now 12 out of the last 13 weeks, Mr Speaker. And we've also seen strong building approval numbers, strong house prices numbers, Mr Speaker, and business confidence coming back. So the member for Rankin asked me about why are we celebrating the fact that people are back in work. And that's because we on this side of the House stand for jobs. Jobs, jobs and more jobs, and that's what the Morrison government is doing, and that is what is occurring across the economy as we're coming back from the biggest hit in over a century.
And I call the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the Morrison government's economic recovery plan to drive our comeback from the COVID-19 recession, and how this plan is backing Australian workers and businesses to get and create more jobs?
The Prime Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for her question. As you've just heard from the Treasurer very eloquently, the significant steps that we're making in the economic comeback from the COVID-19 recession. But today is a very special day. A very important milestone has been reached in this comeback from the COVID-19 recession. And today is the day when the borders are tumbling down, Mr Speaker. Australia was not built for borders, and I welcome the announcements that have been made and the initiation of the opening up of those borders, whether it's between Queensland and New South Wales, or indeed the announcement by the Western Australian Premier, who I spoke to earlier today, with the announcement that Western Australian borders will also be open to those in New South Wales and other places. This is an important part of the comeback. We said we would work to get Australia open by Christmas. And on the record of the achievement so far, Mr Speaker, we are well and truly on that path. And so I thank the Premiers and the Chief Ministers for the way we've worked together patiently. There have been a few disagreements, but the outcome is what matters, Mr Speaker, and that outcome is an Australia that is opening safely, and the challenge now is to remain safely open, because this is important to opening businesses. This is important to opening up more job opportunities. And the work that has been done has been underpinned by a confidence in a public health response that has been put in place, working together at state and territory and federal levels. Not just treasurers working together, but health ministers working together. And I acknowledge all of those who have been working to that end to get the confidence to the point where we are today, that puts Australia in stark contrast to so many other countries around the world. Mr Speaker, the results of this comeback are there to see. The results of that comeback is, as the Treasurer said, some 80% of jobs and lost hours restored. 75% on the figures of measured employment, Mr Speaker, and that is something we welcome. 648,000 measured employment jobs coming back into the economy. The effective unemployment rate, which takes into account the people who have had to leave the labour force or had their hours reduced to zero, has fallen from almost 15% to 7.4% and continues to fall. A strong outcome in the labour market in the face of the biggest and most significant impact to our jobs in this country since the Great Depression. We've seen more than 2 million Australians graduate off JobKeeper in the recent months alone. JobKeeper program a lifeline, and it has now proved to be a springboard for those businesses and those Australians now able to be supported by businesses in their own right without the need for taxpayer assistance. Business and consumer confidence has returned to pre-COVID levels, and private dwelling approvals has reached a 20-year high, Mr Speaker. All of this demonstrating that the comeback is on, but we know there is a lot more to go. The figures are encouraging, but there is more support and there is more standing by Australians needed, and we will do that.
And just before I call the member for Rankin, I'd just like to welcome to the gallery, welcome back former Treasurer Joe Hockey and former Ambassador to the United States. Good to see you. The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why is the Treasurer congratulating himself on the economy when in the 8th year of this Liberal government, wages growth has never been weaker?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm not going to take a lecture from an opposition spokesman where, when they were in government,
members
3 out
on
of the
my
6
left, member
years
for Bruce.
they saw a reduction in real minimum wages, Mr Speaker, when Labor was in office, Mr Speaker. Now, the fact of the matter is, we're celebrating the Australian people and the Australian economy's resilience in the face of a once-in-a-century pandemic, Mr Speaker. We're celebrating the fact that Australia has fared better than nearly every other country in the world in both the health and the economic front. And the fact that Australia, we still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go and a lot of ground to make up. But we're celebrating the fact that Australians are getting back into work. Australians are getting back into work. And the member for Rankin would know that payroll jobs data was up today. Up today, and it's now up for 3 consecutive fortnights. Now, when it comes to real wages, when we take into account inflation, they have grown by an average of 0.7% under the coalition. 0.7%. That's in line with the 20-year average, Mr Speaker. And of course, we've had a terrible hit to the economy with the pandemic, Mr Speaker, and as the RBA Governor has said, Mr Speaker, this is a very challenging time for the economy. But our focus has been on jobs, creating more jobs and helping Australians get back into work, and that is what occurred, and that is what the numbers are showing.
The member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government's delivery of infrastructure is boosting regional communities and supporting our comeback from the COVID-19 recession?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Lyne for his question. Infrastructure, as he knows and as we know on this side of the House, is a core component of our nation's comeback from COVID-19. This government's record pipeline of investment, $110 billion over 10 years, is delivering jobs, delivering stimulus and making sure that we've got the critical infrastructure in the right places right now. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, infrastructure construction has continued. We thank the contractors, the workers, the men and women in the industry for powering on, for getting on with the job, for making sure that they back themselves as we as a government have backed them too. And this ongoing delivery, it's creating jobs, it's creating direct economic stimulus via the projects which are making sure that we transform the nation and the way we live, getting people home sooner and safer. More than $60 billion is budgeted over the next 4 years. Around 400 major projects have been completed since 2013, since in fact when Joe Hockey was Treasurer, and a fine Treasurer he was, Mr Speaker. I bet you he didn't think he'd come back from America and see me sitting in the chair. But anyway, we move on. 200 major projects are under construction right now. Under the local roads and community, that got them going, Mr Speaker, community infrastructure program, we've approved more than 2,500 projects totalling $447 million. Now, in the member for Lyons electorate, works have started on the Clarence-Town Road. Now, it's upgrading more than 17 kilometres of this important link, beginning construction across Woodville and Wirragullah. Now, the President of the Chamber of Commerce of Dungog, a town made famous by Dougie Walters, and he'll celebrate his 75th birthday later this month, and he'll probably get to 101 over, Mr Speaker. But Marion Stewart, she's the President of that fine District Chamber of Commerce, she described the funding for that particular road as, "This road is a major artery into town and we are very happy works have commenced." She said, "We have seen a resurgence of visitors to Dungog and these works will deliver a safer and more inviting welcome." And wherever you go, across regional Australia, across urban Australia, across metropolitan areas, you can see the benefit of the infrastructure rollout writ large, and it is getting Australians home sooner and safer. It is creating jobs. It is creating procurement for all of those regional, local, urban, metropolitan small businesses which benefit so much from the infrastructure that this government is putting in place. And this Treasurer's budget determined that, made sure of that. Right now, going forward, that's what we're doing, building the infrastructure, whether it's Lyme, whether it's any other regional community, right across Australia.
Member for McEwen. You ended up there. Some sort of sick joke by the Whips. Anyway, the member for Hotham. Member for Hotham has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Treasurer, why are you congratulating yourself on the economy when your budget shows that unemployment won't return to pre-COVID levels for more than 4 years?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, it might be known to the member for Hotham that Australia has been hit by a once-in-a-century pandemic. And to put it in perspective for the member for Hotham, during the GFC, the global economy contracted by 0.1%. It's the IMF's forecast that the global economy will contract this year by 4.4%, Mr Speaker. And with 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero early on in this pandemic, it has been a huge task for the Australian economy to start the recovery. And that recovery is now underway with 80% of those people back at work. Now, the fact that 178,000 jobs were created last month is something that goes to the heart of the resilience of the Australian economy. The effective unemployment rate, Mr Speaker, has fallen from 9.3 to 7.4%. In the state of Victoria, the member for Hotham's own state, we saw the effective unemployment rate rise to the highest in the country at 14% and is now down to 10.5%. And today's economic data, showing that consumer confidence is up for 12 out of the last 13 weeks, that house prices are up, Mr Speaker, that building approvals are up, all go as extra indicators to show that the comeback is on, Mr Speaker. The comeback is on. Now, it might be uncomfortable for those opposite who like to talk down the Australian economy. Every opportunity looking to talk down the Australian economy. Even yesterday, when the JobKeeper numbers came out for the month of October, you had the member for Rankin come out and say, oh, that's entirely unsurprising, but only 2 weeks prior he was saying that the decisions by the Morrison government were going to lead to a deeper recession. Well, he can't have it both ways. He can't have it both ways. He can't be talking about a deeper recession and then saying that the comeback, the strong comeback, is entirely unsurprising. Now, Mr Speaker, the former Treasurer Joe Hockey was part of a government that had helped to see jobs being created. Our Prime Minister, who was formerly the Treasurer, has helped put the bricks in place to see the Australian economy become the resilient economy it is. And right now, we are saying to the Australian people that we have their backs, at the start of this crisis, through this crisis, to the end of this crisis.
And I call the member for Mayo.
To the Minister for Agriculture. South Australia produces half of the nation's wine and 80% of the wine that's exported. Wine export to China is worth $1.2 billion annually. Given the spectacular collapse of the Australia to China wine market, what immediate support will the government provide to our winemakers, particularly mine in Mayo?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for her question? And the Australian government is bitterly disappointed by the decision, the preliminary decision by the Chinese government to impose what is a tariff of between 107 and 212%. And the immediate support that we will provide to the industry is appealing that. We have 10 days in which to do that. We are working with industry around that appeal. We will vigorously defend the industry with respect to that around the dumping of wine, which is the second highest pointed price wine in China. So we will vigorously defend that with the industry. We are continuing to, as we have even before this imposition of what is a tariff on our wine, we'd already been trying to open up other markets through our agricultural councillors, who we now have 22, through the free trade agreements that we've put in place. And that's particularly in emerging markets in ASEAN countries, also in the US and Canada of which we actually had a successful finding to us in the WTO. So we'll continue to work in those emerging markets. And tomorrow, the Trade Minister and I is meeting with Tony Battleline, who is the chairman of Australian Grape and Wine, and we'll work with him as the peak body leader of his industry to work through other support mechanisms that the government can help. Obviously, we will work through that in a constructive way within the parameters of the WTO. We are a fair trading nation. We are a rules-based trading nation. We will stay within that, but we will continue to work with them in exploring new markets as quickly as we can and making investments in accelerating the brand Australia wine right around the world.
The member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on how the Morrison government's strong budget measures and programs are helping to ensure our economic comeback from the COVID-19 recession and is well underway?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Chisholm for her question, acknowledge her background in small business, Mr Speaker. As a restaurateur owner, Mr Speaker, and also being a speech pathologist prior to coming...
Here to help.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Chisholm for her... I thank the member for Chisholm for her question, and she understands how the Australian economy has continued to strengthen and the economic recovery is underway. Today, consumer confidence numbers up 2.9%, 12 out of the last 13 weeks, Mr Speaker. Consumer confidence back to the levels that we last saw in February, Mr Speaker. We have seen payroll jobs data up today again, and that is the third consecutive fortnight where we've seen positive payroll jobs data, Mr Speaker. We've seen building approvals up by 3.8% and 14% through the year, Mr Speaker. Capital city house prices are up by 0.7%. The first time we've seen capital city house prices up in every capital city across the country since the start of the pandemic. And the numbers are even stronger in regional Australia, Mr Speaker. Now, the measures of the Morrison government have helped support the economic recovery. Around $70 billion that's gone out the door through JobKeeper. More than $30 billion that has gone out the door through the cash flow boost. Around $14 billion that has gone out the door through the coronavirus supplement, Mr Speaker, and more than $9 billion that has gone to pensioners and others on income support through two $750 payments, with two more $250 payments to come. Now, Mr Speaker, this is helping to create jobs across the economy, with 178,000 jobs coming back last month. And we know that our initiatives like JobKeeper, according to the RBA, have helped save at least 700,000 jobs, Mr Speaker. So our congratulations are to the people of Australia. Our congratulations is to the people of Australia who are now getting back to work, Mr Speaker, and with the national accounts tomorrow, and we've seen previous economic data in recent days, we will continue to see that Australia's economic recovery is underway. The comeback is on.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I join with you in giving a shout-out to Joe Hockey, part of the class of '96, and also to the refinery delegates who are here talking about their jobs. My question is addressed to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I refer to the report of the Disability Royal Commission on COVID-19, which found the government failed to provide PPE to people with disability and support workers, failed to provide access to essential food and medications, and left people with disability feeling forgotten and ignored. Why is it that the Morrison government keep leaving vulnerable Australians behind?
The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. Let me say categorically the government responded with speed when COVID occurred.
Members
February
on my left
was when planning commenced. The 5th of March was when engagement with the agency occurred. 4 meetings of the Disability Reform Council, all ministers got together to work through the planning and response, the first meeting being on the 18th of March. The government made $90 million available to support people with disability as part of a broader community support package. There were $666 million in advance payments to more than 5,000 providers. Over 280,000 masks from the National Medical Stockpile provided, and over 81,000 calls made to individual vulnerable participants to ensure that they were managing and coping well. And to give an idea of the results, Mr Speaker, tragically 907 Australians have so far lost their lives, and that is a tragedy, something that everyone in the House shares. Of that, 9 were NDIS participants. This represents less than 1% of the tragic loss of life, but participants are 1.6% of the population.
Member for Barton.
The response that this government had to NDIS participants saw the loss of life half that of the national average. If we look at infection rates, NDIS participants were 179 of the infections compared to 27,854 across Australia. The infection rate of participants is 0.6% compared to them being 1.6% of Australians. That is a third. And these numbers are testimony to the speed at which
the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. The question went to the...
what's the point of order?
On relevance. Went to the Disability Royal Commission report that was released yesterday. The Minister hasn't mentioned it at all.
I asked the Leader of the Opposition to resume his seat. The Minister for Health will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition in his preamble referred to a number of matters, but he only had one question at the end. It was a very open-ended question. The Minister therefore has extreme latitude and is in order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. After the 18th of March DRC, the Shadow Minister for the NDIS, the member for Maribyrnong, was briefed on the 23rd of March and the Green spokesman was briefed on the 25th of March. At no point at all did the opposition raise any issues with the government's response. At no time at all. DRC then met again on the 9th of April, the 11th of May and the 24th of July. At each of the 4 emergency meetings of all disability ministers, state and federal, we worked together with over $1 billion worth of supports to assist Australians with disability. And the list goes on, as the Health Minister's press release showed, at the levels of engagement that this government put in place. And that is why the rates of infection and the tragic loss of life amongst NDIS participants are 1/3 to 1/2 of the national average.
The member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison-McCormack government is providing critical support to our tourism sector and in particular to travel agents as part of our economic comeback from the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister representing the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Cowper for this question. I know the plight of our travel agents is something that he's been working very hard on. He's had representations from travel agents in New South Wales, Queensland, even the Northern Territory and Victoria, and he's met with the Australian Federated Travel Agents Association, and this has been an issue he's been championing, and can I commend him for that. And travel agents have faced very unique circumstances, having to refund existing bookings whilst having limited trade due to COVID-19. Very, very difficult time for our travel agents during COVID-19, and it's why today, in consultation with the industry, and very importantly in consultation with the industry, once again can I commend the member for Cowper for the role he's played in that, and the Minister for Trade and Tourism and Investment, Simon Birmingham, for the consultation he's had with the industry. We announced $128 million scheme to assist our travel agents. Eligible travel agents with a turnover of between $50,000 and $20 million a year will be able to apply for a one-off payment. Payments will be scaled from $1,500 for businesses with a turnover of $50,000 up to $100,000 for a business with a turnover of $20 million. This will go a long way to help and support those travel agents that have been through that very, very difficult time, as I mentioned before. This is on top of our significant support for the tourism and travel industry during the COVID-19 pandemic. Support include $50 million for a Recovery for Regional Tourism Fund to support 9 regions heavily reliant on international tourism, $100 million for tourism infrastructure under a new round of the Building Better Regions Fund, and a $50 million business events grant program. And importantly, through Tourism Australia's latest domestic campaign, we're asking Australians to talk to your local travel agent today for your next trip. And I know that they could inquire about going to visit those wonderful koala sculptures in the member for Cowper's electorate, or they could think about coming down and seeing the 12 Apostles along the Great Ocean Road. The 12 Apostles along the Great Ocean Road, another great place where you can go. But, Mr Speaker, the reason we're doing this is because there are 660,000 people employed in the tourism industry, and we want to make sure that those jobs come back, into the tourism industry, because it's all part of our economic comeback approach, which is focused on jobs, jobs, jobs and jobs.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Why does the Morrison government keep leaving vulnerable Australians behind? Isn't that what the Aged Care Royal Commission showed when it found the Morrison government had no COVID plan for aged care during a period when 685 aged care residents died? And isn't that what the Disability Royal Commission found when it said the Morrison government left Australians with a disability feeling forgotten and ignored?
The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. Let me thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. Government, of course, rejects completely the premise of what the Leader of the Opposition says, and the facts bear witness to themselves. As my last answer went through, all the responses and all the areas where the government responded quickly, including 81,000 individual calls to vulnerable participants. At the same time, in terms of disability supports, plans were extended by 24 months, ensuring continuity of support and increasing capacity of staff to focus on urgent and required changes. Massive phone planning meetings occurred to ensure that face-to-face wasn't required. Increased plan flexibility was put in place to allow participants to purchase additional hours of support coordination from their core or capacity-building budgets. And more importantly, the rate of expenditure of the NDIS ostensibly did not reduce. The same amount of payments, which is now upwards of $5 billion per quarter, increased. We temporarily increased flexibility for participants to purchase low-cost AT items, including smart devices, to enable them to continue to receive their disability supports. We enabled priority access to home delivery services from major supermarket chains so that Australians with disability received priority above all other Australians for Coles and Woolies to deliver their groceries. We allowed participants living in restricted areas to purchase PPE for their own use. At the same time, we moved away from Labor's record of waiting 90 minutes on the phone to 60 seconds, answering over 160,000 calls. We moved away from 500,000 logins a day in terms of digital platforms to 2.6 million Australians logging in per day. Rather than over 70,000 Australians going into service centres every day, that's now down to 30,000 because of the high volume and high grade of service in telephony and digital channels that Australians can receive. This is the amount of effort that this government put in place to delivering services to vulnerable Australians, whether they are Australians with disability or otherwise. And we'll continue to deliver this level of service. We'll continue to follow the public health orders that come out from states as we continue to deliver the essential items that Australian citizens require. I'm proud of what this government has done to stump up for Australians throughout the pandemic. And I think everyone on this side should be extraordinarily proud of what we've done. The results globally speak for themselves. And whilst I appreciate that those opposite are the opposition, it would be good for us to sit back and reflect how, in the concert of nations, the performance of this government in taking care of Australians in a once-in-100-year pandemic has gone compared to other nations in the world.
The member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the Minister inform the House how the Morrison government's commitment to the manufacturing sector is helping create jobs and drive our recovery from the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And it was great to join him last week in his electorate to open a new state-of-the-art manufacturing facility. Now, Proform is a brilliant Aussie company that makes plant-based protein products, and we back them with a grant in the first round of the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund. And since then, they have gone from strength to strength. They're taking on new employees, and in fact, this year alone, the founders have scaled that company from 5 to 25 employees. Now, Proform is a fantastic example of value-adding to our world-class agriculture industry. And alongside of our meat producers, they're primed to capitalise on Australia's reputation for producing safe, premium, high-quality food. Now, Proform also demonstrates how we harness science and technology to drive industry. Now, they invested $2.3 million in a joint venture with CSIRO for their initial research and development. And this is exactly what the Morrison government wants businesses to do. Collaboration is one of the key pillars of our government's modern manufacturing strategy, and that's designed to make our manufacturers more resilient, more competitive and able to scale up so that they can take on the world. And of course, Mr Speaker, scaling up means that there will be more jobs created, and these are quality jobs right along the manufacturing spectrum, from research and development through manufacturing, production processes through to sales, market and after-sales services in particular. Now, Mr Speaker, we needed to make sure that we were putting in place the right economic conditions for all businesses, all of industry, to be able to thrive, and that is what we are doing. So our manufacturers, including the more than 440 in the electorate of Barara, are benefiting from many of the things that this government has put in place. So it's our investment in skills which is driving our comeback from COVID. It's the tax incentives, including the expansion of the instant asset write-off. And I'm so pleased we have such a magnificent Treasurer who is driving these reforms for us. And we have an excellent Energy Minister who is working day and night to bring down our energy costs. And as a government, we are investing in research and development, and we put our money where our mouths were. And we are working day and night to make sure that we reduce red tape for Australian
The Minister's
industry.
time has concluded, and I give the call to the member for Maribyrnong.
My question is to the Minister for Government Services. I refer to his answer yesterday concerning the tragic suicide of Robodebt victim Jared Madgwick, and I spoke to Kathy's mum last night, and she asked me to ask, can the Minister explain how chasing Jared for almost $2,000 has been a sound economic decision, given that Jared and I would have full employment now, but due to my grief, PTSD and depression, I'm forced to rely on the welfare system? Minister, what is the answer?
The Minister for Government Services has the call.
Let me thank the member for his question, and first of all let me acknowledge Mrs Madgwick's grief. The grief of the loss of any child is truly tragic, and I think that's something the whole House accepts. The government, of course, has a requirement in terms of raising debts. I think we all accept that as well, and we all respect that. In the case of Mrs Madgwick, her son's debt was sufficient and lawful and was not raised by income averaging. And this is a very important point. And I grieve for Mrs Madgwick, I truly do. I can't even begin to understand her pain. Can't. But the debt wasn't income averaged, which is the issue at case in the settlement. It was a legitimate debt. And 1 million Australians right now will be receiving legitimate debts. Debt started being raised on the 2nd of November. We won't collect till February. And it's going to be hard. And governments of all persuasions have raised legitimate debts. We've all done it. There's many ministers on the front bench, and I respect what you've done. You'll receive no criticism from me on the way that many ministers around here have done it. It's a lawful part of what we're required to do, and we do it sensibly and we do it respectfully. Every day my department, just to give you some context, every day my department gets from the social worker census database, because the numbers I'm drawing from and from escalation, we receive on average about 1 escalated harm a day, which is of such significance. It gets escalated literally to the secretary level, and we get many, many more every day that are dealt with. And this has been going on for decades. The numbers haven't increased per se. This is just what our Services Australians do in our name. We deal with vulnerable Australians. At the same time, the last financial year we answered 29.2 million calls of Australians who need service and support, and will continue to do so. Dealing with human loss of life and tragedy is something my agency does every single day, and it's hard. And I want to just do quite genuinely a shout out to the Service Australian staff that deal with this every single day. And can I encourage all of us? There's 325 service centres. Many of you have got service centres in your electorate. If you get a chance, just pop in. Pop in and say thank you. That's all. Don't pop
Members
in.
on my left.
I'm not going to respond to those opposite because I'm quite genuine about this, because our staff deal with quite genuine tragedy, and I think they do it, really well. I think they do. So let's just be cognizant of it. These are difficult issues, and we try and deal with them respectfully. But suicide and self-harm, it's tragic. It occurs every day in our communities, and it's something we're all cognizant of, and it's something that my agency is cognizant on, and we'll continue to do our legislated and mandated task, and we understand the challenges that come with that.
Is the Leader of the Opposition seeking to table a document? Or? Yes, the Leader of the so the member for Maribyrnong.
I would just seek to table the statement of Kath Madgwick, the lady to whom the minister was referring, where she clearly says if it were not for the compliance letter and the threat of debt, Jared wouldn't have taken his own life.
Is leave granted?
Leave is not granted.
Come on. The member for Reid.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is working with international partners during our comeback from the COVID-19 pandemic to keep Australians safe?
The Minister representing the Minister for Defence.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and for her great support of the Australian Defence Force. And of course this government has been able to manage our budget successfully over a number of years, which has put us in a good position to deal with the response to COVID and to the comeback that is underway, Mr Speaker. But we've also been able to increase our investment into the Australian Defence Force, and it's now above 2% of GDP, and that is incredibly important because we do know, Mr Speaker, that we are in the midst of the most significant strategic realignment since the Second World War. The Morrison government is safeguarding our COVID-19 comeback at this critical time by ensuring the Indo-Pacific remains secure. Now, Mr Speaker, as many Australians would be aware, Australia participated in the maritime exercise Malabar this month, and we did so with our close partners India, Japan and the United States. And I should acknowledge the former ambassador, Australia's greatest ever ambassador to the United States, Joe Hockey, up in the gallery there today. And bipartisan support of that statement, no doubt, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, we do know that Malabar occurred over 2 phases, and it showcased the deep trust between major Indo-Pacific democracies and their will to work together on common security interests. And, Mr Speaker, we have taken very significant steps to strengthen the Australia-Japan bilateral defence relationship. We are very special strategic partners. We work incredibly closely together on trade, on security and defence, and our involvement in Malabar was just one demonstration of that. Now, whilst in Tokyo, Prime Minister Morrison met with Prime Minister Sukkar in releasing a statement reaffirming the importance of enhancing regular bilateral and multilateral cooperative activities to maintain a free, open, secure, inclusive and prosperous region. And as we know, the Prime Minister is in isolation with only a couple of days to go, but it was an absolute priority for him, for our government and for our country that he go to Tokyo to meet with the Prime Minister, and it really reinforced the relationship, Mr Speaker. Obviously, the Prime Minister's announced an agreement in principle on a landmark defence treaty, the Reciprocal Access Agreement. The agreement paves the way for a new chapter of advanced defence cooperation between our 2 nations. And, Mr Speaker, the RAA will facilitate more complex practical engagement and enhance our interoperability and cooperation in support of a stable Indo-Pacific. The Morrison government is committed to building strong regional partnerships that will ensure that our region continues to be secure and prosperous, and that both large and small nations have their sovereignty respected.
The member for Maribyrnong.
My question is to the Minister for Government Services. Yesterday in this House, the Minister promised Parliament to deliver me data relating to the reports the government received of victims of the illegal robo-debt scheme threatening self-harm? Why has the minister reneged and not delivered this information? Why won't the minister admit the government received at least 14 official reports of robo-debt victims threatening self-harm in 2017 and 2018? Is it because the number is even higher?
The Minister for Government Services.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. Let me thank the member for his question. For the benefit of the House, I'll table the letter I wrote to the member so everyone is absolutely clear of what we're talking about. The member raised issues that were presented to the court as part of the second further amended statement of claim. And as all members would be aware, the Commonwealth and Gordon Legal have acknowledged there is a settlement. It's not yet finalised in the court, it's been agreed. But we've acknowledged the settlement. Both the Commonwealth and Gordon Legal have acknowledged the settlement is not an admission of liability, does not accept or reflect any acceptance of these allegations, and does not reflect any knowledge of unlawfulness. The actual issues, issues that the member for Maribyrnong raised are unsubstantiated claims that were presented by Gordon Legal into
Members
the court
on my left.
as part of the second further amended statement of claim. They were simply what Gordon Legal put through. And if the Commonwealth and indeed Labor's lawyers can actually reach settlement and acknowledge that there is no admission of liability, that there's no reflection of acceptance, or indeed no acceptance of knowledge, why can't Labor accept that?
The member for... the Leader of the House.
I'll just table the document that the minister was referring to.
The Leader of the House. The member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is driving our economic comeback from the COVID-19 recession by opening new trade markets for Australian agricultural exports and supporting our agricultural industry export their world-class products?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Mallee for a question and acknowledge the significant contribution the electorate of Mallee makes not only to agriculture but to agricultural exports. And she knows better than anyone the importance of that to her community. And to put it in perspective and keep it simple, we are a nation of 25 million people. We produce enough food for 75 million. So if we don't engage with the world, if we don't trade with the world, we don't need the communities that support those agricultural communities around Australia. There's 270,000 Australians that are employed in agriculture. 3 in every 5 of those jobs is actually linked to agricultural trade. And last year, we exported nearly $54 billion worth of agricultural product. That's up $4 billion over the last 4 years. So such is the importance and the investment we continue to make in securing new free trade agreements. And in fact, the Trade Minister is working on one with the UK and EU. And that's not long after we've just ratified Indonesia, 260 million people on our doorstep that has opened up not just market access, reduced tariffs to make it easier for our exporters, our primary producers, to get their product around the world. We've also taken into account COVID, $669 million committed in air freight support in making sure that we can get our high-end agricultural product out on cargo planes that was previously gone out on passenger planes, making sure we can be seen not only as producing the best food and fibre in the world, but also being one of the most reliable exporters in the world, even through COVID. And we're also putting boots on the ground. We're now going up to 22 agricultural councillors in embassies and high commissions around the world, and those men and women's job is to work at government-to-government level to reduce technical barriers and to get market access commodity by commodity. We've also made a significant investment in this year's budget, over $300 million in modernising our export platform, making it single touch, allowing our exporters to be able to apply to export their product around. Where previously around 20 application forms were required, we are going back to 1. We were issuing over 200,000 export permits a year. We are in a manual basis. We are now going to do that in a digital basis. This is engaging with technology to streamline it, but also have complementary measures to support industries around the regulatory touch, to protect brand Australia, but make sure that we can do that with the lightest regulatory touch, engaging in technology. We're putting smart glasses on meat inspectors so that they can do external external inspections to cut the cost. We expect for the meat industry alone over $45 million a year will go back to the industry. Over 10 years across all our commodities, about $1.2 billion worth of money going back into those industries. This is about an investment in our agricultural sector, in them achieving their ambitious goal of $100 billion by 2030.
The member for Conaghan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. Can the Minister confirm the Administrative Appeals Tribunal first determined that robo-debt was illegal in March 2017 and on at least 75 other occasions, but the government persisted with its illegal scheme right up until December 2019?
The Minister for Government Services.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. Let me thank the member for a question. As we all understand, the AAT is independent in reviewing administrative decisions. Each matter decided by the AAT is, of course, made on a case-by-case basis, having regard to the particular facts and circumstances of each case. AAT decisions are usually supported by clearly written statements of reason, having regard to the additional information the AAT has considered during its hearing. As it reviews administrative decisions, the Commonwealth is always looking at those decisions, and in terms of the refund process, just so the member is aware, having raised the issue of the AAT, and I'm sure she has concern for those who have a debt raised insufficiently because of the long-standing 26-year practice of averaged income data, Services Australia will work closely with the AAT about debts raised wholly or partially based on income averaging that's been decided by the AAT. Now, for those Australians who believe that they may have had a debt raised over the last 26 years because of the use of averaged income data, those Australians are able to seek from Services Australia at any time a review into a debt they believe may have been used by average income data over the last 3 decades.
The member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General and the Minister for Industrial Relations. Will the Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government's industrial relations reforms will play a vital role in our economic comeback from the COVID-19 recession, particularly in the mining and resources sector?
The Attorney-General and Minister for Industrial Relations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And it is the case that a particular focus of our working groups, which are aiming at reform legislation we are hoping to bring to the Parliament very soon, a particular focus has been on the mining sector, because when we look at what the mining sector has done for this country and for every employee in this country during the COVID pandemic, it's been nothing short of remarkable. And perhaps when we think about the comeback that we're now in the middle of economically, there are few sectors that have played a greater role in preserving jobs during the crisis that we have been through, and there'll be few sectors that will play a more important role as we come out and come back from the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And when we look at the mining and resources sector, it has remained remarkably strong during 1920 and during the COVID crisis. It accounts for 9% of Australia's GDP and for half of the Australian export earnings, totalling $290 billion. But in the June 2020 quarter, the national accounts showed that the mining sector still actually managed to grow by 0.2%. So in the height of the COVID pandemic, against the trend, compared to an economy-wide fall in growth of 7%, the mining sector still managed to grow by 0.2%. And the automatic stabilising effect that employment had on our economy and for every single Australian cannot be underestimated. The mining industry did great things for us during the COVID pandemic and can be one of the central keys to working our way out. And even through all of the struggles that we've been through, mining investment has been on the rise. It's up by 1.3%, or $13.5 billion in the June quarter, and 7.9%, or $52 billion in the 12 months since the June quarter in 2019. One of the things that we have been looking at with respect to the mining sector is the issue of greenfields agreements. We want to try and create an optimal regulatory setting to support the next wave of major resource and project investment. And why do we want to do that? Because we think that these complicated investment decisions are very important and they produce that sort of counter-cyclical growth that we've seen in the mining industry. In a 2019 survey of infrastructure market participants, there was pretty serious concern indicated about the level of regulatory burden and how that impacts on investments. 79% of investors said that North America provides a compelling investment opportunity. Unfortunately, less than half said the same thing about Australia, and 83% agreed that various uncertainties in Australia's policy and regulatory setting is limiting their willingness to invest. That is why we want to see life of project greenfield investments to bring on more investment decisions.
The Morrison government's Home Builder grant is helping Australians build a home of their own, while at the same time supporting construction jobs through to 2022 and helping drive our economy's comeback from the COVID-19 recession.
The Minister for Housing and Assistant Treasurer.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Boothby for her question. She knows that the Coalition is unequivocally and unquestionably a government that supports the residential construction industry, and of course we are the parties of home ownership, and we support first home buyers and we support people through the Home Builder grant to get into a new home. And the Home Builder has been an enormous success. It's ignited the residential construction industry and it's been a key part of our comeback from the COVID-19 recession. That comeback was even highlighted again today through the latest ABS data on building approvals. And the ABS data on building approvals today showed that they weren't at their highest level just since the pandemic commenced. The approvals are at their highest level for 20 years. Now, those on this side of the House that have supported the Home Builder program, have supported the residential construction industry, not in our wildest dreams did we think that the industry would be elevated to those heights, but that exactly is what Home Builder has done. And there are a few places around the country that have been more successful than South Australia, the home state of the member for Boothby, who have seen a rise in building approvals of 25% in September and October combined. And what does this all mean? It means new jobs. New homes, new construction means new jobs. And in South Australia alone, the HIA and the ABS, importantly the ABS, have said that 2,700 jobs have been created as a result of the Home Builder program. Again, the Home Builder program was there to support the existing up to 1 million jobs in the industry, and now we're seeing in many parts of the country jobs actually increasing. Now, the member for Boothby, I hope she gets an opportunity to meet a couple of new constituents of hers, Erin and Matt, who were quoted in the Adelaide Advertiser as saying that the Home Builder grant tipped the balance for them to buy a new home. That's what Home Builder did. Yes, Home Builder's there to support the 1 million people that work in the industry, but for Erin and Matt, it means a new home. So the Labor Party has been out there criticising Home Builder for the last 6 months. There are tens of thousands of people like Erin and Matt who are now in a first home, and we've also got up to 1 million Australians who have had their jobs supported by the Home Builder program. That's why we've extended it through to the 31st of March, It's a key part of the economic comeback, and the coalition is here for first home buyers and the residential construction industry.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. Why did the government persist with its robo-debt scheme when it knew the debt notices were inaccurate and kept sending them? It knew they were illegal and kept sending them, and it knew they were driving people to self-harm and it kept sending them.
The Minister for Government Services.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. The government rejects the premise of the Leader of the Opposition's question, but it is important the government puts on the record exactly what we do know. We know that the use of averaged income data was widely used from 1994 under the Keating government. We know that. And we know that because yesterday I tabled not just an individual letter sent to a citizen, but the actual letter template that was pulled out of the ISIS mainframe, which was widely used. So we know that it's been going on for at least 26 years, and anecdotally the use of averaged income data from taxation was going back further. What we know from that individual letter and from the form letter is we know that from the Keating government onwards, that letters were sent to say, if you don't engage with the department, average income data will be used and a bill will be sent. We know that. It's not a question that's open. It's not an assertion. It's a fact. We know that. So for 26 years, we know that. We know from the work we've done to understand how far this was going on. We know that in 2009, 16.8% of reviews were done solely or partially using averaging. We know from 2011, when the member for Sydney was in the chair, 24.4% were used solely for averaging. Let's look at what else we know. The budget paper, 2009-2010, page 330 on budget paper 2.
If the Minister can just pause for a second and members cease interjecting. The Minister's been able to compare and contrast, but the question didn't allow him to range as widely as he's starting to range. I'll just ask him to come back to and be relevant to the question.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. We know the widespread usage of this scheme. We know the widespread usage of income averaging going back 26 years. We know full well from the second further amended statement of claim that both the Commonwealth and Gordon Legal have accepted and acknowledged, as not an admission of liability, that there was no understanding of lawfulness. And the government is not suggesting that those opposite views was unlawful from 2007 to 2013. The government's not acknowledging that at all. The government is working on the understanding that those opposite used exactly the same process from 2007 to 2013, and we accept that those opposite did that in good faith at the time. And the reason I know that is because I have a media release from June 2011 from the member of Maribyrnong and the member of Sydney saying a new data matching initiative between Centrelink and the ATO is expected to claw back millions of dollars from welfare recipients who have debts with the Australian government. That is what we all now know.
The member for Curtin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. Will the Minister update the House on the Morrison government's progress on reaching Australia's emission reduction targets?
The Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Yes. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Curtin for her question. And I acknowledge that as a former Vice-Chancellor of Notre Dame University in WA, she knows the extraordinary role that technology can play in solving hard problems, and one of those, of course, is bringing down emissions whilst maintaining a strong economy, Mr Speaker, and that's exactly what we're committed to doing as part of our comeback from the pandemic, Mr Speaker. Now, we have strong targets, we have an enviable track record, and we have a clear plan, Mr Speaker. And when we make commitments, we keep them. And our commitment is clear: lower prices, keeping the lights on, and bringing down emissions, Mr Speaker, and I can confirm to the House that our plan is working, because the Kyoto era came to an end on June 30 this year, and we now know from data that was put out yesterday, report that was put out yesterday, that we beat our Kyoto era targets by 459 million tonnes, Mr Speaker. 459 million tonnes. That's almost a year's worth of emissions. Now, Mr Speaker, when we came into government, the deficit to reach that target was 755 million tonnes. What an extraordinary turnaround, Mr Speaker. And whilst others have walked away from their commitments, whilst others have done that, we've rolled up our sleeves and got on with the job. Now, thanks to significant reductions in electricity, in agriculture, in the land sector, we've absolutely smashed our targets. And in fact, this year, the year just passed, our emissions were 519 million tonnes. That was 20% lower than the forecast for this year when those opposite left government, and that was with a carbon tax. They had a carbon tax, Mr Speaker. Now, because Australia's experience has been that when new technologies become commercially competitive, Australians will adopt them. We know that's how to bring down emissions, and we're seeing that with renewables right now. We've seen $30 billion of investments in renewables since 2017, same rate this year as last year, and we're deploying them 10 times faster than the global average, 4 times faster than the US, the UK, Europe, Japan, Mr Speaker. Now, not all countries can boast our level of success. We've brought down emissions 16.6% since 2005, the baseline year for Paris, and countries like Canada and New Zealand, they've barely budged, Mr Speaker, 16.6 down in that time. We're getting on with the job of bringing down emissions, deploying technology, not taxation, because if it's not technology, it is taxation, Mr Speaker. We're getting on with the job, real and practical action to bring down emissions as we come back from the pandemic.
The member for Maribyrnong.
It's to the Minister for Government Services. The Minister has said in question time today that its robo-debt scheme is neither unlawful nor that any documents exist that prove that the Commonwealth was warned robo-debt victims were threatening self-harm. So why did it pay $1.2 billion in the largest ever class action settlement to settle robo-debt, including $112 million of compensation? And does the Minister stand by a statement that there is no advice to the Commonwealth that victims of robo-debt were threatening self-harm?
The Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As I announced on the 19th of November last year, the government had come to the conclusion, after decades and decades of average ATO income data being used, at least back to 1994, the government had come to the conclusion, and I announced on the 19th of November, that the use of or raising a debt solely or partially based on averaged income data from the ATO was not sufficient. It was being used for at least 26 years back to the Keating era, but it was this government that said it is not sufficient. And based on the lack of sufficiency of proof points for a debt to be crystallised, that's when the government acted. But be under no doubt, the automatic of raising debts is not an issue here. Governments of all persuasions have been doing this quite rightly and quite legitimately for a long time. The 07-08 financial year, $1.8 billion in debts. To 08-09, $1.9 billion, and the list goes on. It's a legitimate process of government. But the use of income average.
The member for Maribyrnong on a point of order.
Just on the point of relevance, my question, acknowledging a preamble, my question specifically said, why did the government pay $1.2 billion if you were perfectly legal?
The members on both sides, the Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As I announced on the 19th of November last year, the government came to the conclusion that a process that had been going for 3 decades lacked sufficiency, and therefore the government responded. Government's data goes back in terms of computing power back to 2015. Hence, we were able to provide refunds to Australians because our data went back to 2015 and we responded because of a lack of sufficiency. Hence why, to date, we have paid back 406,672 people, 707.3 million in
Member for
refunds.
Corangamite.
But considering the use of averaged income data has been going back for 2 or 3 decades, Australians always have the right to seek for their debts to be reviewed at any time. And if there are Australians who believe that their debt going back that amount of time was raised solely or partially and can demonstrate that, they should come to Services Australia and ask for review. It was on that basis, after 3 decades, that the government reached the point of the lack of sufficiency and acted lawfully.
The member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is protecting and preserving a natural environment and our native species, such as the koala?
The Minister for the Environment. No, the Leader of the Opposition. You can't take a point of order on a question. The Leader of the Opposition.
You can, in fact, Mr Speaker.
Yes, you're right, you can, but it doesn't end well. But you can. That's right.
You can on irony, Mr Speaker. You can indeed.
Yes, and I just say to the Leader of the Opposition, I think he's made a compelling point, and that would lead me to rule out every question from the Opposition today. So if he wants me to go down that path, the Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Wentworth for his question and appreciate his interest in the koala, an iconic umbrella species as we came out of the Black Summer bushfires. Last week, the Morrison government announced a new koala package. This was a further $18 million investment in koala conservation, on top of the $26 million we've invested since 2014 and in advance of the release of the draft Koala Recovery Plan, which is going out for public consultation early next year. Mr Speaker, as well as research and health science, the package announced a key approach in safeguarding the koala, which is a national koala census.
The Minister will perhaps just pause. The member for Macarthur on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, my koalas in my community have been studied, they've been tracked, their genetics have been known for years.
The member for Macarthur. Member for Macarthur resume his seat. I just say to the member for Macarthur, 90-second statements are between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. The Minister has the call.
Well, I'm very happy, Mr Speaker, to reassure. I'm very happy to reassure the member for Macarthur that the chair of the Independent Threatened Species Scientific Committee, Helene Marsh, has called the census a very significant move and said that it will put the whole koala strategy at a national level on a completely different footing than it's been in the past. And the strategy and package have been welcomed by the Australian Conservation Foundation. They don't always line up in support of the government, but they've actually welcomed this as funding for koala mapping and restoration, a good step at a critical time. But back to the important package, Mr Speaker. Despite their iconic status, there's much to learn about how koala populations are faring, and that's why this will fill in the gaps and give us better coordination and reporting so that we can best protect this extraordinary marsupial. The census will be a standing item at the meeting of Environment Ministers, and a range of existing and innovative approaches such as drones, thermal imaging, acoustic surveys, detector dogs and cameras will be used. Citizen science will be brought to the fore. Communities, schools and conservation volunteers are already doing much of this work, and they will continue. Since we've come to government, Mr Speaker, we've committed more than $500 million in funding towards our threatened species, including the koala. We've established the Threatened Species Commissioner and strategy. 99.9% of the more than 1,900 listed species have either a conservation advice or recovery plan in action. Now, this koala package, which has been endorsed by scientists, backed by experts, underscores our approach to environmental protection, which is that when it comes to environmental protection, we listen to the experts, we listen to the science, and we take practical action that can make a difference.
The Leader of the House.
That further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Leader of the House.